Now, amid a suspended indefinite strike over union demands for a new minimum wage that public sector workers say must translate into an actual living wage, where is the government's money being spent, and why is it that the people never seem to feel that government spending? Jobs are promised but never generated. Electricity is pledged, but the government never seems to push hard enough to get the power pinch sorted once and for all. And then there's infrastructure, or the lack of it. Bad roads, no way of moving produce through the waterways, inadequate connectivity of domestic flights, and obviously you can't talk of properly growing your economy when you can't rely on infrastructure. Billions, of course, needed to build that infrastructure. Meanwhile, Nigeria's debt grows and the country grapples with a significant funding shortfall, with capital flows into the country at their lowest level in decades. And then comes the minimum wage issue in a country where growth is as lethargic as ever, with yet another year of economic deceleration, reflecting the effect of tight monetary policies to rein in persistently high inflation. So, with such cataclysmically mammoth challenges ahead, how in such dire circumstances can we be optimistic? Well, for his assessment, I'm joined now in the studio by the Director of the Public Sector Initiative at the Lagos Business School, Dr. Franklin Ngwu, who's also an Associate Professor in Strategy, Corporate Governance and Risk Management. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm
pessimistic. Make me feel optimistic.
I think if we look at Nigeria in terms of the potentials that we have, you are supposed to be optimistic. What we are supposed to do is to look at that potentials and see our strengths, look at our opportunities, and now use the strengths and opportunities to look at the weaknesses and the threats that we have. Well, so in terms of comparative assessment between the strengths and opportunities and the threats and the risks, challenges, of course, the strengths and opportunities far, far outweigh the challenges that we have. So you have to be optimistic. Well,
I will get you to try and explain that a bit more, because you're a well-known economist, a number cruncher, strategy evaluator and developer. But let's start with the minimum wage. What do you make of the fact that President Tinubu has said he's committed to a minimum wage above 60,000 naira?
I think it's encouraging that the government is appreciating the challenges that the workers are facing. You also realize that the workers asking for 400-something-thousand, now looking at the cost of living. I mean, on Sunday we went to buy tomato and they said that a pint of tomato is now 10,000 naira. So if you look at the cost of living, the cost of bag of rice, water, everything, the 400-something-thousand, somebody can actually argue that it's small. But the reality of it is that then the question then is, how will the government get the money to pay? How will the private sector get the money to pay? Which brings the issue of the crisis of governance that we have in
because that was going to be my next question. Yes. I mean, as I said, you're a diligent number cruncher. Yes. So we want the facts.
Yes.
Can the country afford it, given the current economic outlook and the revenue pinch?
I think that what we are supposed to do, can the country afford it in terms of the potentials? Yes, we should be able to afford a higher minimum wage. I'm not talking about the 400-something-thousand. Right. I'm talking about a living wage, you know, something that the workers at the end of the month, when they go back home, they will say, we can look after our families, whether it's a family of 2, 3, 4, 5, as the case may be. You can at least feed 3 times in a day, as the case may be. And of course, if you look at other African countries, the minimum wage that they are paying is far, far higher than what we have in Nigeria. Whether it's looking at Kenya, South Africa, Rwanda, Ghana, as the case may be. So even if we say that we are going to pay in comparison to some of these African countries, it means that the minimum wage has to go up. Even if we now say that we are the giant of Africa, it means expectedly that we should even see how we can do more. But what is important is how do we properly, strategically think about how do we increase the productivity in the economy.
That's a very good point, because what I was going to ask you is, I mean, we've been talking about inflation, and I know you've been making assessments and so on, but is there a problem with the way the government is seeing the minimum wage issue as a threat to the economy? Because a wage increase could actually be a good thing for the economy, couldn't it?
Yes, of course. I think it relates to our governance problem in Nigeria. In the sense, under normal circumstances, in other societies, when inflation goes up, based on the combination of monetary and fiscal policies and the outcomes, there should be a well-known mechanisms of saying the wages will increase by XY percentage. But because of the kind of governance we have in Nigeria, because of the kind of structure of governance we have, you know, these discussions back and forth, this relates to the issue that are deeper than just the minimum wage. So even if you increase the minimum wage, will it solve the problem? The answer is no. So once you increase, expectedly, inflation, the private sector who are paying workers might likely increase the price of goods and services, because that means the cost of producing will increase. It means that inflation will go up. The question then is, how do we reduce the inflation? Will you keep increasing the interest rate to rein in inflation? So it's all and
of course, if you keep increasing the interest rates, your economy isn't going to grow.
It's going to go down as well. So it requires proper thinking, proper coordination, real assessment. And as I said, the roots of the matter is the governance system that we have in Nigeria.
Right, but
you
the
need to re-examine.
Right, the Tinubu government says it's done that assessment that you're talking about. They say they don't deny that there are challenges ahead, but it is optimistic, the government is, that Nigeria's economy will start to recover from about 2025 and beyond that turn the corner. Do you share in that optimism? Do your numbers support that assertion? Beyond your, patriotism as a Nigerian, do your numbers support that assertion?
No, my numbers, I believe that we should actually grow more than what we are doing at the moment. I believe that the government, if they're able to do one or two things, particularly in terms of the coordination of the policies, particularly in terms of clear signaling of what the governments want to do, particularly in terms of proper policy formulation and implementation, I believe that Nigeria has all the potentials to grow above what we are doing at the moment. Because we have all it takes to do that. This is outside being patriotic, this is outside, but in terms of looking at the numbers, in terms of looking at what we are supposed to, what we can do and all that, we should be able to grow and achieve a better outcome.
Yeah, no, you're saying we should be able to, all things being equal. But I'm asking you, in your assessment of the policies and the moves that the Tinubu government is making, do you share in their optimism that based on what they have done so far and what you have been able to assess, that the recovery will start from about 2025 and we will turn the economy? And when we mean recovery, we're talking about inflation coming down, we're talking about revenue going up and all the rest of it.
I think, of course, you know that there's a difference between policy formulation and implementation.
Absolutely.
So,
but you have to look at it
holistically to be able to say we're going to grow higher and all that. Right. I even think that there are other things that they can do at the moment that will even enable us to start growing even before 2025.
But they're not doing those things.
They are doing some of them. They are doing some of them.
Right.
But what I'm trying to also point out is that, of course, you might decide to wear a white shirt tomorrow. But by tomorrow, you might tend to wear a green shirt. So what people say, or what the government say that they will do, the question is if they will diligently follow and do what they're supposed to do and what they've promised. Even if the president said that they were going to do X, Y, Z, it might not really be the president who will really do transport, agriculture, police, security, aviation. So all this will be done by the ministers and the ministries and governor, and you now take it down to governors, down to local government, down to private sector.
Right.
The growth will come from all these what I can call the stakeholders in the economy.
Well, you've drawn a distinction, rightfully so, between implementation and formulation.
Yes.
Let's start with formulation. What is your assessment?
In terms of the formulation, I think there've been so many policies, and in terms of the announcement of these policies, they've also there've been so many announcements. But what seems to be the issue is the coordination of these policies, and in terms of the sequencing of these policies. So I've also said before that the issue of removing of the subsidy, it's fine, it can be managed, but floating naira was wrong. It shouldn't have been done at the time it was done. And what is even better would have been a kind of managed float, which seems to be, we've gone back to it. But when you announce, you might not be able to control the consequences of that announcement. So their policies are good in the face of it, but in terms of the way it was announced and the coordination of the implementation might require more thinking.
And you very relevantly, you've done a fairly comprehensive analysis of how economic and governance outcomes are determined by economic policies. But just put that in context for us in a Nigerian setting, bearing in mind, of course, that we're not all professors like you are.
Yeah.
And I think we've got graphs and things to illustrate the point you're making.
Yeah. So what happens is that economic outcomes, or what we call governance outcomes, are determined by economic policies. But economic policies are determined by the political system and the political structures of the society. But interestingly, that political system or political structure are also determined by the sociology of the society. And when I say sociology, I'm talking about the norms and values, the cultures, or what we call in the graph, what we call the social embeddedness. So if you look at that graph, the social embeddedness is who we are as a people. And you can see it takes about 1,000 years to develop. So the social embeddedness affects the institutional environment, which is now the formal legal system that we are using, the way we are supposed to do things, as the case may be. And through that formal institutional environment, you now have governance. So if I break it down a little bit, you find out that during elections, maybe PDP or APC, any of the political parties, we select a presidential candidate, not because the person is the most competent or the most intelligent. It's normally selected based on our social embeddedness. And then when it now comes to selecting the VP candidate, it's also based on that social embeddedness. Then when these selections are done, they become the candidates of the political parties. And then INEC is supposed to conduct this election using our formal legal system. And remember that the reasons, the factors that led to this emergence of these candidates are based on social embeddedness. And of course, you know, when norms and values are not documented, they become what we call informal laws, or become what we call the culture of the society. And then, when we now conduct an election, the voting and other factors that determine the outcome of this election are somehow influenced by this social embeddedness. And a winner emerges. When a winner emerges, you now find that the person will now govern, maybe for 4 years, as the case may be. But however, in the subconsciousness of the person, remembers that the factors that led to my emergence can be related to the social embeddedness.
Right.
So the persons now start allocating resources, which is the last level, bearing in mind those factors that they were enabling. And that's why most of the time when we have winners that emerge, immediately they start thinking about re-election and start ensuring that those factors of social embeddedness are properly serviced and maintained to enable them to get power again. So you find out that what we are having is more or less competition for power, not competition for development.
That's interesting. And it's interesting that the economic policies that you were talking about will logically be influenced and determined by the politics of the country, in this case Nigeria.
Yes.
And You argue that that politics and its structures are determined by the sociology of the society. You made that point earlier.
Yes.
And that is why we keep getting the outcomes that we get, because you say there's an inherent contradiction. Tell us more.
So a typical example is, let's even bring it down. So if you look at our system of governance, so you become a governor and you're going to govern for 4 years. And after 4 years, there's a re-election. And you now win and you govern for another 4 years. And they tell you it's over. So you have to step aside. However, in who we are as a people, so look at Oni of Ife, Obi of Onitsha, Awujale of Ijebuland, and all the traditional rulers. There is no term limit in terms of when they emerge. And interestingly, they don't even die. So when anything happens to them, they transit. So that is who we are as a people. And that's our culture, that's our norms and values. However, you now have a governor who now takes over for 4 years, and after 8 years, you tell him, no, it's time for you to go and become an ordinary citizen. So there's a contradiction.
I see the point you're making.
I hope you're getting what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
And remember also, a typical example, if you want to buy a land, you buy a land from the family, from the village, as the case may be. When you now want to do anything on that land, they will tell you, go to the state government to get a CFO, as the case may be. You get a CFO, you come back to the land to do a foundation. They tell you, the boys of the village will tell you, you have to settle us because we are the boys of the land. And you now go to the police. You have a CFO signed by the state governor, giving you the authority of ownership on that land. And you now go to enforce that authority. And you go to the police will advise you and say, please, go and settle with the boys, referring you back to the social embeddedness. So you're always back and forth in terms of how you want to do things. So that is the problem we have in life. So you find out when your governor comes in, the first place that you have to go and pay courtesy call is to the traditional rulers, who are the social embeddedness of the society. So there is this kind of conflict. So we did a kind of study, and we had the Obi of Onitsha, Emir of Kano, and Sultan of Sokoto as the case may be, not traditional rulers. And you ask Nigerians, who will you want to go to if there is a problem? To look at the case. Of course, the different groups in Nigeria actually preferred the traditional rulers of their respective societies. It means that in terms of judgment, in terms of legal system, in terms of justice, in terms of cases, that there's a preference to the social embeddedness as compared to our former legal system.
Right.
And that is why you find out that if you look at rule of law, you look at government effectiveness, you look at regulatory quality, in all these key variables of governance, Nigeria has consistently been performing very poorly. Because who we are and what we are practicing, there's a big contradiction. And that now dovetails into governance, which now dovetails into policies, which now dovetails into economic outcomes. And that is why you find out that poverty remains, insecurity remains, unemployment remains, inflation keeps going.
That is an absolutely fascinating analysis. And you link this to the minimum wage crisis, as well as the demand for the devolution of powers, state police, poor performance of ministers on the federal level, commissioners on the state level, governors, unemployment, poverty, etc. Connect the dots, if you will.
So you find out that what we have, we are operating a federal, but is it really federal in the scheme of things? The answer is no. So you find out, so let's go back to UK, where we got our legal system from. So in UK, for example, you go to Edinburgh, the Scottish people are told, please govern yourself in line with the norms and values of the Scottish people.
Absolutely.
And you now go to Wales. The Welsh people are told, govern yourself in line with the norms and values of Welsh people.
The same thing with the Northern Irish.
Northern Ireland, exactly. Yeah. So the law, the LLB that you study in Manchester is LLB English law.
Yeah.
The one you do in Glasgow is LLB Scottish law.
Absolutely.
However, in London, the Prime Minister is now allowed to govern, focusing on certain things that are common across these people. So in the same way in Nigeria, that's why the governors are saying, we want more powers. That's why some group of people are saying, let's devolve more powers to the subnationals. So that at the end of the day, if a governor of a state is not performing, the citizens of that place can ask him, oh boy, what are you doing? And they will know where the money is coming from. But in a situation where every month, you just send Commissioner for Finance to Abuja and they go and collect money, so the people don't even know where the money is coming from. They are not even responsible for generating that money. So they don't really have a sense of responsibility to ask for accountability and transparency on the government. And so if we're able to do what we are supposed to do, and that is, there will be more accountability, there will be more transparency, there will be more questioning of what is going on, as the case may be. So in a situation where governor might decide and say, Charles, you'll be a local government chairman, or you'll be a senator, or you'll be a this, and it becomes like that. But if we're able to do what the right thing, that's why people like Governor of Obasteki is asking that there's a need to redesign Nigeria. That's why so many groups are also asking there's a need to, maybe some people call it restructuring, some people call it devolution, some people call it redesigning, as the case may be. But all these are relating to who we are as in terms of our social embeddedness. That the only way we can move forward as a country is to resolve this conflict between the social embeddedness and the social environment. The social environment means the formal legal system that we are using. And at the end of the day, it is the fulcrum upon which everything that you want to do in government depends. Because once you don't understand the formal legal system, the only thing you can do to survive is to see how you can manipulate the system to achieve what you want to achieve.
Well, I mean, it seems like a fairly reasonable, logical assessment, and you know, 1 + 1, very linear.
Yeah.
You know, 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 2 is 4. I mean, but that's not happening, is it? How do we come out of that quagmire?
It's that's the problem, in the sense that, so let's even look at US as well. The laws in Florida is different from the laws in Texas. The laws in Chicago is different from the laws in other states. All they are doing is appreciating their social embeddedness and allowing the people, because who you are determines everything that you want to do.
In other words, the local environment, predominates.
Exactly. Because it is who you are, is embedded, is inside you. But what happens then is that we are using the formal system that we use for functional relationships. So there is not deep, it's not in you. There's no sense of responsibility and accountability. So all you do is to manipulate or see how you can rigmarole around and achieve what you want to achieve. And interestingly, if you emerge and take power through this flawed system to protect your interests, what you now do is to see how you can sustain that flawed system. Even when you know privately that this system is not sustainable, that is not going to achieve what we want to achieve. I remember a time that we engaged the Minister of Solid Minerals, and he was saying that what we have in solid minerals, it's oil and gas is more or less insignificant compared to what we have, but that sector is not working. And the reason why it's not working is that you cannot be in Abuja and dictate what happens in Zamfara, dictate what happens in Ebonyi, dictate what happens in Kogi, as the case may be. Once you finish in Abuja and send people to the local communities and the people that are in charge can do anything and frustrate what you're doing. But if you give them the responsibility and the ownership and say, please, this thing, if we get 1,000, please give us 200 naira in Abuja and take 800 naira. So you find out that people will now say, this is our own. We are only giving Abuja a little. And this will even remove the pressure from the president, from the federal.
It becomes easier to manage.
It becomes easier to manage. And the local government, of course, when the president goes to the states, you go to local government, and we have a better society and a better system, as the case may be.
Absolutely extraordinary analysis. I mean, I'm trying to see how this can be applied in the short term, because obviously the kind of reforms and change that you're talking about is a longer term thing.
Not really. Not really. In the short term, I mean, these things that are happening, I will say it has been happening for some years. But of course, you remember that during PMB's regime, there were discussions. And
that's Buhari.
Yeah, Buhari's regime, yes. There were discussions which led to a rethinking of what we have in the exclusive list and what we have in the concurrent list. So currently, railway, electricity, and other items that were formerly in the exclusive list have been moved to the concurrent list. And that is enabling states like Abia, like Ngwu, like other states to now say, okay, we're going to have our own electricity, something as the case may be. So what we're supposed to do, what we can do now in the immediate, even though it what we're supposed to do in the immediate is to now say, and maybe the president can call the governors and say, let's rethink this thing. What are the powers that you might need that you can enable you to perform well? A typical example is the road system. So I remember some people were blaming Obaseki that there are roads in Edo State that couldn't be done. But in his own submissions, he is saying that you cannot take all the money and keep it in Abuja. And the little I have in Edo, I'm using to do other things. But if you give me the money and there's nothing like federal road, state road, local road, it means that if there's any road that is not passable in Edo, you have to blame me because you've given me all the resources to do that. So there are certain things that we can do in the short term, there are certain things that we can do in the medium term, there are certain things that we can do in the long term. But what is important is let's rethink the exclusive list, rethink the concurrent list, and see how we can move some items. The center is controlling so much resources and so much power. So there is a need to, devolve more powers to the subnationals and to the local governments.
Very educational. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Franklin Ngwu is the director of the Public Sector Initiative at the Lagos Business School. He's also an associate professor in strategy, corporate governance, and risk management. Brilliant stuff. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.